Today I'll be taking a look at my first Mido. I've never experienced the brand before. I never owned one of their pieces. I've only ever seen them like in passing at ADs before. So let's see what this one's all about and whether or not it's worth it. So we have a diameter of 40 millimeters, lug to lug of 47.2, height of 12.3, and we have a lug width of 19 millimeters. Some other general specifications for the watch are going to have the Mido caliber 80 beating in here, which is basically a rebranded ETA 2836, and I also believe they slowed down the beat rate in order to achieve an 80-hour power reserve, which is pretty cool. Something some of these more budget companies are starting to do nowadays, offering a longer power reserve. Mine's currently running about plus 6 seconds a day, which is not bad by any means. We also have 50 meters of stated water resistance without a screw down crown, just a regular push-pull. We also have a nice kind of dome here to the crystal, which is still sapphire, which is also nice to see. Basically, a lot of companies usually either go for a mineral crystal or an acrylic, and it's nice to see a company actually going for sapphire, taking the extra kind of cost on themselves. And last but not least, this retails for around the $800, maybe $900 mark. I'm not 100% certain. I'll put somewhere right here what it actually is, but usually you can find these used for around $650, $700, or find a discount at your AD at the very least. Just really quickly on the dial, really, I mean, it's done well, it looks nice, it's pretty elegantly just portioned out. There's not a lot of text on the dial, despite there being kind of this extra complication of a pulsation scale. It still looks like a fairly kind of minimal and clean design. They kept the text very minimal. They lined up the 6 o'clock date, which is just nice because it just stands out less than the 3 o'clock. And the fact that they kind of almost color matched it, it is done in black rather than blue, but I think because of this kind of black to bluish sunburst pattern, it actually does look like it's color matched. All the design elements I think are just executed well. The syringe hands along with the pulsation scale makes me feel like it's a doctored watch, or not doctored, but a doctor's watch. Because, you know, syringes make me think of doctors. Pulsation scale, obviously, kind of, why would you be taking your heart rate unless you're at the doctor? So it gives me that kind of vibe. Very cool dial. I like this sunburst. It's a little more aggressive than I usually like to go for, but some people are into it. And the dome adds just a little bit of distortion at the edges, nothing major, but it gives that kind of pseudo vintage feel. Zooming in a bit closer here with the Mido, we do see we have this pretty fine, almost brushed pattern that gives that sunburst appearance. Pretty nicely done. All the printing is done in this really nice texture. Towards the edges, you can see how it kind of turns black and has that kind of dotted, dimply texture that just makes it look a little darker. We also see that the numerals are outlined in this black kind of material, which I honestly didn't notice until we got in at this magnification level. And I think possibly that just adds to the contrast of the numeral itself, which is a really nice touch. It just makes it stand out more, makes it appear more white and more apparent and easier to read, which is not bad at all. The syringe hands are nicely shaped. The Lume infill is done well. There is a little bit of roughness on the hands right there towards the base of the hour, right there on like the base of the hand stack itself. The minute hand's looking a little bit cleaner, but overall, I mean, this is a watch that you're getting at the sub-grand price point. So it's not, I'm not expecting Grand Seiko level of finishing, but it is not badly done at all. There you can see the date window nicely framed out, nicely lined, a nice continuity here between kind of the outer track of this kind of seconds track and the just continuing into that date window there, kind of goes around, which I think is a nice touch. Here we can actually see there is a misprint at that 6 o'clock marker. There's kind of like a little bubble near the bottom of it. I honestly haven't noticed it in my wearing experience, but that is a little bit unfortunate to see that here. I wish it wasn't there, but hey, there are going to be small imperfections that you kind of have to deal with at watches at this price point sometimes. But overall, I think it is a nicely done dial. It's cleanly done. All the text is done really well. There aren't many misprint issues rather than the 6 o'clock here. And yeah, I think it's pretty well executed. Moving on to the case of this watch, and I think this also is a pretty interesting aspect of the watch itself. It's mainly polished, all polished on the top sides. We have this kind of very thin brushing for this kind of pseudo mid case here. Also some slight brushing on the inside of these lug tops here. One of the most interesting parts about the case to me is actually the design of these lugs themselves. They're almost like a somewhat horn style lug. It kind of goes along that vein, obviously not as dramatic, but it has an interesting shape to it. It has a very geometric shape to it. It is a kind of case design, a lug design that we don't see a lot in modern watchmaking. I don't even know if it exists in vintage watchmaking, but it gives a kind of vintage flair to the watch itself. Definitely a little bit more intricate and complicated than lug designs usually are nowadays. And it is nice to see a company at this price point really not necessarily being obligated to reinvent a new cool case shape, but doing it anyways because it adds flair to the design. The lugs, again, I think are really, really cool. I think they pair nicely with the watch itself. The bezel is pretty thin, so you get a lot of just dial area in this watch. The crown, I think, is fairly nicely sized for what it is. It's also pretty well integrated into the case, I think. It kind of thins out and just joins the case pretty nicely. There's not a lot of knurling on it, but with what knurling there is, you can grab it pretty well, wind it really well. But it is a automatic watch, so you're not gonna have to wind it too often. Looking at it from the case side, we can see we have a very nice curve down to those lugs there, so it is gonna wear well on the case back. It comes just about to the case back, if not below it, so it is really gonna sit into the wrist well. They've kind of tried to hide the actual thickness of the mid case by making this the most prominent part of the mid case, which I think is interesting. I don't think it necessarily tricks me as much as it should. I think if they would have made that a little thicker, it actually would have maybe looked a little bit better. But there is a nice continuity between the lug and the mid case here. Flipping over to the back, we don't really have anything crazy done here, just kind of customized rotor decoration, just very, very plain movement. But overall, you're getting pretty good accuracy, at least from my experience, and a great power reserve, so can't complain much there. Overall, I just think it's a pretty nicely designed case. I think it is a unique looking case. It definitely doesn't look like a Rolex clone, or it doesn't look like just a plain circular case with some lugs on it. It is a pretty interesting design. It's a unique design, and I think that it looks good in the total package here. So moving on to how this watch wears. Earlier I was wearing my Quartz Creedor. Haven't given this enough love, but starting to, so I'll be wearing this a little more. And here we have the watch sitting on my 6.5 inch wrist. I think you can tell it sits pretty well. The dial diameter is a little bit on the larger side, but I don't think it looks oversized on my wrist by any means. The lug to lug is fairly constrained, so it does wear well within the bounds of my wrist. It conforms well, so it doesn't dig or doesn't kind of feel uncomfortable or top heavy in any way. One thing I didn't mention is this is the stock strap by Mido. It is nice, but also not nice at the same time. It's very, very supple, but it also has that feel of that classic kind of plasticky, but good plastic quality strap. It feels very similar to maybe like a EH or Benchmark strap off of Amazon that's like somewhere between the $15 and $20 mark rather. So it's not the most high quality strap ever, but it definitely is a little bit better than that kind of stock Swiss strap that you're kind of used to. So that is nice to see. Taking a look from the side there, you can see the case is, somewhat tall, but if there's any flexion at all, it does wear well into the wrist. It does integrate pretty well. It doesn't, I think, sit too high off the wrist by any means. I think it looks nice. This is a dressier leaning watch, but it also has kind of a somewhat modern flair about it, especially because of the sizing. So I think kind of the overall proportions are not wrong here. Of course, me being me would have loved to see a 38 or a 37 millimeter, but it does work well as it exists now. Yeah, overall, I don't think you're gonna have any complaints with this watch. Kind of a nice overall case shape there that kind of thins towards the case back. It is a pretty good wear. So looking at some other straps here, we have this really, really nice strap, one of my favorites from Veblenist. It is in this kind of light gray pattern, but it has this kind of wax treating, whereas it wears away, it creates a little bit of a darker patterning. I think it pairs really well with the blue tones of the watch. I think it just looks nice overall. And yeah, there we have it on wrist. It almost gives it an even more vintage vibe because it, for some reason, just to me, the strap feels vintage. It feels like it has life that it's lived. So I do like this combo. For the more daring of you, I think blue and pink usually pairs pretty well together. So this is a custom strap from Delugs. Nice kind of bubblegum baby pink to it. And I like the way it pairs with the blue. There we have it on wrist, a little more bright, a nice little pop of color overall. And yeah, I do dig this combo. If you want to be a little bit more conservative, you can go for this distressed leather style strap from Vario. Italian leather, super comfortable. Love these straps, especially for the price point. There we have it on wrist. A little bit of a more monochrome look, but I think the distressed leather gives it a nice feel. The sunburst obviously adding a little pop. So it still is cool to me. And of course, the silicone strap off of Amazon by Archer Straps. Super nice look. I think it pairs really well with the white elements on the dial. They now actually make these in 19 millimeters, so it fits the watch as it should. And yeah, and there we have it on wrist. And another thing I just really like about silicone straps, and this one in particular, is it just allows the watch to conform so well to the wrist. It's pretty lightweight, it's super soft, it's super comfortable, and it just really plants the watch onto the wrist. So I just like the way it wears, I like the way it looks on this watch. matches the white elements, matches the white of the Lume fill, and yeah, I just like it. So looming this up and just taking a look at it, we can see I think it's loomed pretty well. The hands are very, very bright. The numerals are very legible. Overall, I mean, not really any complaints. It's easy to see. It lasts for a pretty good amount of time, and I think Mido did a pretty good job overall. Relooming and comparing to the Timex, as you can see, pretty similar color temperature, pretty similar brightness. Overall, again, Mido did a pretty good job. Can't complain at all, and I think it just looks good. So moving on to pros and cons, and I think one of the most major ones is going to be the case design. It's just unique. It's not a case design we see very often. It's a little like Omega reminiscent slightly, but it definitely takes it in its own direction. It wears well, it looks nice on wrist, it looks nice off wrist, and it just shows that Mido didn't just, you know, carbon copy a watch. They didn't just stamp something out. They actually took time to design and actually make it more interesting than they really had to. My next pro will be the dial quality. I think all the applied elements are done really well. The hands are done well. The color of the dial is amazing, and the sunburst isn't too aggressive, which I really like. And it is just a really nice looking dial. It's complemented well by the overall design, and I think Mido just did a great job on the design of this watch. And if you do get this watch, you'll fall in love with the design aspect. Last but not least, I think a big pro for this watch is just unique. There aren't any other watches using a kind of pulsometer scale, or at least in modern watches that I know of. There aren't many watches in this price point that have such a unique case shape. There aren't really a lot of Midos that I think look like this either. So this is kind of a very unique watch. I think it has a particular aesthetic that isn't shared by really anything else in this price point. So if you get this watch, you are really getting something that doesn't look like everything else on the market. Now moving on to cons, and there really aren't many. One of the biggest ones, and the first one I want to talk about, is the fact that it has 19mm lugs. Is kind of unnecessary. They should have just gone for 20. 18 probably would have been too small for the overall size of the watch itself, so 20 would have been fine. Much easier to find straps. Again, I have a lot of 19mm straps, so it doesn't necessarily bother me, but it still is a pain, especially if you haven't built a 19mm strap collection yet. So just do 20 next time. I don't know why so many companies use 19. And then my only really other con for this watch is going to be that it's a little pricey. At $900-ish retail, I think it is slightly overpriced. Again, it is unique, but there are a lot of great micro brand offerings, and you can just look at a brand like Visitor, which is doing great stuff around like $600. So I think if you're going to get this watch, try to get a discount new at an AD. I'm sure you can get 15, maybe even 20% off, and that's probably much more preferred. Even then, maybe look used. This model isn't necessarily very popular. I haven't seen them come up on the used market very often, but try to get a discount at your AD or try to find one used, and then it, I think, becomes a really good value proposition because it is so unique. This was a really cool watch. I didn't expect to like this Mido as much as I did. I didn't really know what to feel or think going into Mido as a brand. I guess no one really talks about them, you know, so I haven't really had them on my radar, and this watch has definitely put the brand on my radar. It is beautifully designed, it is well made, it looks nice, it fits nice on wrist, so it really does have a lot going for it in the design department and in the value proposition department. I don't think you'll be disappointed if you end up going for this watch, or if you already like the look of it. It really is a pretty beautiful piece. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in another one.